Welcome back to the Nuckhead podcast. First of all, apologies for not releasing a new episode last week. Basically what happened was the guest I had scheduled canceled last minute, and I had to decide between recording a solo episode completely unprepared or just taking the L and focusing on finishing the main channel videos. So obviously I chose the latter, but nonetheless, apologies that I didn't put out an episode. I hope you found some other Canucks content to tide you over during my absence. Speaking of other Canucks content, today's guest is one of the best there is at making it. He's a writer over at Canucks Army, and he's also the host of a show that airs live every weekday at 2 p.m. on YouTube and X. Please welcome David Quadrelli. David Quadrelli, welcome to the Nuckhead podcast. How are you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this. It's going to be fun.
It's a quick one. You don't have much time, so I thought I'd jump right into some hard-hitting questions, okay? First of all, Kiefer Sherwood. He's already got 133 hits. He's running away with the league lead in hits, and he's on pace for 545, which would absolutely demolish the record Jeremy Lauzon set last year, which I think was 380 something. Do you think he does it? And for the record, I don't necessarily mean does he hit 500, but do you think he's going to beat the record?
I do. And I'll tell you why. Like, it's the conversation of, okay, if you're throwing a lot of hits, it's the old Jake Virtanen thing. Like, Jake Virtanen used to throw a bunch of hits, but it was because he was constantly chasing the play. He was always out of position. He was horrible defensively. Like, we've seen this in Vancouver. But that's not what's happening with Kiefer Sherwood. Like, Kiefer Sherwood is playing strong defense. His play away from the puck is great, and he's not chasing those hits. And the big thing is that we've seen it through wins and through losses that he just doesn't really change his game. Like, he's throwing those hits in wins. He's throwing those hits in losses. Like, he's not changing his game at all. So I'm looking at it saying, like, it's 2 months into the season now, or a month and a half really, but almost 2 months into the season. At this point, I have no reason to think that he's going to slow down or that he's not going to be able to keep up this pace. Maybe he slows down the pace a little bit, but again, you just mentioned how high that pace is currently. Even if he slows down, quote unquote, he's still going to break the record. So I say yes, he does it.
He's finished with 5 or more hits in a game 16 times already this season.
It's crazy. It's bananas.
He's on my fantasy team, and after every game, I'm just checking to see how many points he got, and especially in the games when he no assists, no goals. I'm like, how does this guy? Like, he's still generating points. He's got 8 hits this game, and it keeps happening. And yeah, you're right. Like, I don't see what would slow him down because we're now a month into the season, or over a month into the season, and it's clear that this is just the type of game he plays.
Yeah, like I said, we've seen it in wins, we've seen it in losses, we've seen it in the bottom 6, we've seen it in the top 6. Like, no matter where you put him, no matter what's going on with the team around him, it just seems like his game doesn't change. And players like that are so rare because that's the thing, right? Like, players who throw hits aren't rare, but players who can do it and are so consistent night in, night out, that's rare. And especially, you take into account the cap hit, all that sort of stuff that he brings. Like, really, there are very few Kiefer Sherwoods in the league historically. Like, he's playing a game that we just don't see very much.
On top of that, he's playing up and down the lineup too. Like, now that he's with Pettersson, he's going to get more ice time. He already is, and that might even equal more hits. So who knows what he's capable of. This is the chase I'm really focused on. Forget Ovechkin. I want to know if he can get to 500.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, and he must be Tockett's like favorite player right now.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Everything Tocchet speaks about when he says what he looks for in players and what he wants players to do, the non-negotiables. Like, Sherwood came packaged to him, ready to do all of that. Think of how much leash Phil DiGiuseppe got in the top 6 just last year. Like, Kiefer Sherwood's basically like a maxed out Phil DiGiuseppe, right? Like, that's what Kiefer Sherwood is. So again, we know how much Tocchet likes PDG. Now we know how much he likes Kiefer Sherwood.
And I'm so glad he's found chemistry with Pettersson. Like, that line gives me, not that it needs to be compared to anything, but it kind of reminds me of the West Coast Express. And I'm aware that could just be because we have number 44 running around and hitting everyone. But it's just like the skill mixed with the physicality. It's something that I've been dreaming of. Like, when we're like putting together lines before the season, kind of just imagining what the team's going to look like, I kept wanting to see Garland and Joshua with Pettersson. And I wasn't the only one. I think that was pretty common. A lot of people wanted to see that, just that mix of skill and physicality. And I think we're getting that now, basically.
I mean, the real luxury, right, is that they just got Brock Boeser back. The Pettersson, Sherwood, DeBrusk line didn't have their best showing last night in Boston as a unit. So I don't know if they're going to split it up against Pittsburgh on Wednesday night. But the point is that we know what Kiefer Sherwood looks like when he's down in the lineup. And like I said, it's basically the same thing. So again, it's such a luxury to have that on your team, because when a guy like Brock Boeser goes down, now there's not going to be any question marks of like, okay, who should go up and play with Pettersson? Like, we know the answer is going to be Kiefer Sherwood. And in past years, the Ilya Mikheyevs, the Sam Laffertys that they were trying to play with Elias Pettersson, those guys just didn't have the tools and what Kiefer Sherwood does on a nightly basis. So again, it's just a luxury for your team to have a guy like that.
What did you think of Boeser's first game back?
Definitely looked sluggish to me. Again, though, like, it's a concussion. Like, the thing that people don't understand, and you know what, I shouldn't definitively say it's a concussion. There's reports of like whiplash, whatever you want to call it. The thing that people don't understand with head injuries, I think we can call it that, is that these players don't get to just keep up their conditioning the way they would if it's a, an regular upper body injury. Obviously, you have a high ankle sprain, you probably can't keep up your conditioning the way you'd like to, but like with a concussion, like Boeser wasn't on the ice very much and he's ramping it up. So I give him last night and just say, like, you know what, you needed to shake out the cobwebs a bit, get back to your game. And I'm not worried about it at all. I don't think it was a great game from him, but I think he's going to be better against Pittsburgh. And I think he's only going to continue to get closer to the player that he was before he went down with an injury. But yeah, didn't love what I saw against Boston. But again, first game back from an injury like that, you're not expecting too much.
Yeah, so basically my same thoughts here. It was the two penalties he took weren't great, but I mean, again, I'm not going to pick on a guy who just got back from an injury, especially someone like Boeser. Pettersson, you're probably tired of talking about him a little bit. I am, because he's been just a lightning rod of controversy since the season started, since the end of last season. But it seems like he's back. And I mean, so I looked at his first 5 games, 33-point pace. Second batch of 5 games, 33-point pace. Third batch of 5 games, 82-point pace. And then the last 5, 98-point pace. Now, obviously, there's more to it than just points. But I mean, he's been great defensively all season, even when he was slumping. How much more does Petey have to do before we can all dunk on his haters? Is really the question.
That's a great question. Ultimately, those haters are going to exist until it gets done in the playoffs. So I don't want to do the Mitch Marner thing where I say, "Oh, none of it matters until the playoffs." It's just I know there's going to be people that act like that. That's not who I am. That's not what I'm going to say. But what I will say is I'm not going to be doing any dunking myself, because to some extent I do agree that you got to see it in the playoffs, because the worst thing to do is dunk and then have it dunked right back on you when he goes quiet in the playoffs, if that happens. So I think it's going to be a bit, to answer your question, I think it's going to be a bit, but in the topic of Pettersson being back, I've been very wary of saying that, because I don't want to say it and then he goes back into a bit of a slump, because realistically, like, yeah, you bring up the point pace and everything, but like, we've seen him be even better than he is right now, right? Like, we've seen it in the past. So what are we saying back about? Are we saying back to like, okay, you're back at a player who's able to put up 100 points, and I know the point totals were there, but like I think we've seen more from PD in the past at the playmaking and the shot. So I'm scared to come out and say, oh, he's back, but we will see is kind of the way I'm looking at it. And I'm saying right now, enjoy what you have. And it's certainly good to see him succeeding. I will say that that's the big thing, is it's nice to see him finding success. And like you said, playing good defense, doing the right things, and now the point total is kind of following.
Yeah, we need another PD 5-point night. Really, that would be one of the solidifiers. Also, dunking on people only to get dunked on right after is like my whole brand. So that's what I'm gonna keep doing.
Fair.
But yeah, okay. So prior to last season, for about 10 years, the idea of trading away prospects and picks was the last thing we wanted as Canucks fans. But now it's one of the main talking points, and for good reason, I understand, but it still makes me a bit nervous. Like, I realize it's inevitable, but yeah, it still makes me nervous. So I'm curious, which prospects do you think are in play for a trade? And also, who would you be the most okay with seeing get moved?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we always talk about the importance of Jonathan Lecker-Mackey, and to some extent as well, Tom Willander, those guys hitting on their ELCs, especially during the OEL buyout years. I know the cap's going to go up, but having impact players on ELCs is an edge that not every team is going to have, especially competitive teams. So having that is such an advantage for the Canucks that it's scary to think about moving either of those players. But that being said, when you're a team where the Canucks are, and I don't think they're contenders in their current form, but I think they're very close. I think they're very close to being a contending team. You get Thatcher Demko back, you add a top 4 defenseman to this team. I think you're at that level of being a contending team with the forward group that they have. Obviously a lot of question marks around JT Miller and whatnot right now, but on paper right now, the team, I look at them and say they are probably just one top 4 defenseman away from being a cup contender. Now, that being said, that's a lot of teams. And a lot of teams are going to be looking for that piece on the back end. So it's not as easy as just saying like, yeah, well, they're going to do that. And when they do that, they're a cup contender. It has to make sense. And ultimately, I think if it does make sense, like if you're getting Rasmus Andersson, again, who signed through next season, and you're confident that you're going to be able to work something out with him beyond next year, you kind of have to have everything on the table. And that's going to be the big fish at the trade deadline, right? Is Rasmus Andersson, if the Flames decide to move him. They could also just wait until next season for the reason that I just said, that he signed until next season. So I don't know what the silver bullet is for the Canucks. I just think when you're, and I always stress this, if you legitimately believe in your team, and I had doubts when Elias Pettersson was struggling, I said, like, you don't go all in on a team where Elias Pettersson is your third line center and he's not playing like himself. You don't go all in, because the point of going all in is winning a cup. And you brought up for years, people were upset about moving prospects and picks. That's because the team wasn't a playoff team and they were moving out assets to become a playoff team. That was the Tyler Toffoli trade. It was going to get them over the hump to get them into the playoffs. They get the bubble playoffs. Obviously, it's totally different with the COVID pandemic and everything. But that was the big difference, right? Was that that team wasn't ready to contend for anything other than a playoff spot. And they were making trades year after year to make the playoffs. And then they weren't making the playoffs. So that was what pissed everybody off. And ultimately why those years are looked at as such a failure was that they were trying to be good that whole time and they failed miserably. So, that's the big difference, right? Is that this team, this management regime, when they move out picks, when they move out prospects, it's either to get off of a mistake from the past regime. Hell, it's sometimes to get off mistakes that they've made and they've failed quickly. And they've said, like, this isn't working out. We need to move. We need to get this figured out. And to their credit, they've been able to do that. Right. So I have a lot of respect for this management regime, obviously, and I think that's the big difference, is that people have a level of trust in this regime to actually make the right move and really decide which prospect is going to be on the move and then make sure it works out for them.
The one thing I love about this management group right now is when they do make a mistake, it's almost like they catch it before we do, and they adjust. Yeah, there's no pride in seeing it through and, admitting failure or anything like that. They try Sprong, it didn't work, he's gone. They try Mikheyev, didn't work, he's gone. So I love that.
I'm actually curious to get your thoughts, because like Nils Höglander, again, we're recording this on Wednesday. Another doesn't play in the third period against Boston, like low ice time. They just signed him to a 3-year deal. Like, are they going to fail quickly on that one? Are they going to say we shouldn't have signed this extension, we're going to have to move him? Like what do you think happens with Nils Höglander?
I think it's a little weird because his place in the lineup, it seems to be getting less and less important. Like there's other players stepping up, like Sherwood, and even just seeing a player like Sasson or Lekkerimaki in that brief call up he had. It's clear that if this is the best we're going to get out of Höglander, then it does make him pretty expendable. But the problem I'm having with it is, are you going to wait until he starts scoring a bit to get his trade value back up? Because now that he does have, it's not that crazy of a cap hit, but it is, it's $3 million, right? So, it becomes a bit harder to trade him.
Teams want to know what they're getting. And right now, I don't think teams know what they're getting in Nils Höglander. And the longer this goes on, the worse it gets in my mind. So I don't know what the answer is.
I know, I don't either. And I, like, for the record, I assume this from your answer as well, but correct me if I'm wrong, but you're not super excited about the idea of trading away a Lekkerimaki or Höglander. Not saying that that's on the table, but because I know I'm not. That would be upsetting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like, I'm of the opinion that if it's for the right piece, then whatever. Like,
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's true. If it's some
that's when
crazy,
that's when I start to say, like, okay, like, good teams do trade prospects, but again, there's that OEL buyout that other good teams don't have to contend with. Other teams don't have to contend with. So again, if you think those guys are going to hit on their ELC, they are so valuable, and that's a legitimate competitive advantage that separates like good teams from great teams, is having those impact guys on ELCs. And I'll tell you, like, I was really impressed with Lekkerimäki in his brief NHL stint. And I think there's a lot of tools there. I think he's going to be someone that plays in the top 6 probably as soon as next year. And again, he's going to be on that ELC next year. So that's a valuable piece for your team to have. So I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it. I would really just say, like, show me the trade if Lekkerimäki or Willander are involved, and I'll tell you if I like it or not. That's basically what it is for me.
fair enough. And also, we both trust the management group, so chances are they're going to nail it, whatever they do. Okay, well, so you mentioned you don't think the Canucks are Stanley Cup contenders right now in their current form. Rewind to the start of round 1 of last year. Did you consider them contenders then?
Yeah, I did. I basically considered them contenders right after the Lindholm trade, and even down the stretch where Lindholm struggled, you looked at it and said, like, this team should be able to contend. Now, I think in retrospect, I think I was wrong about that, though, right? Because the Cup contenders create offense differently than that Canucks team did. And again, they really lock it down. They were playing that style last season. They were playing really defensively responsible. But there's a reason that ever since training camp started, Tocchet's been speaking about creating off the rush, because they got to the playoffs, realized that, hey, if we don't create off the rush, like, we're not going to be able to do anything in the playoffs. And eventually they run into the Edmonton Oilers, who do create a lot off the rush. And thankfully there were some goaltending issues that made that series a lot closer. And ultimately, like, I'll be honest with you, if the Canucks have Brock Boeser in Game 7, there's a chance they go to the third round. I think a lot of people would agree with me. I don't think that's a super hot take, but I don't think
Mikheyev scored that goal.
Exactly. There's so many what ifs, or Zadorov at the end, right? If Zadorov, right? So there's lots of different what ifs. But to answer the question as a whole, like, I did consider them Cup contenders. I think I might have been wrong about that, but looking at this team, like the way they're creating offense and the way that they're playing right now, you're assuming that they start to figure out some of this stuff when it comes to, okay, like, the big thing that's happened a lot this year is the forwards don't really know when to swing, and they're doing it a little bit too much, right? And I think, like, again, when people talk about systems play, okay, what are they talking about? They're talking about defensemen pinching. They're talking about forwards coming back forward. Like, they're talking about positioning and how you're moving the puck out of your zone. And the way that the Canucks wanted to play last year, it felt like a guy like Vinny Desharnais is super helpful. But the way that they're trying to play this year, it feels like Desharnais and Myers are almost a little bit redundant, right? So go get another top 4 guy. All of a sudden, Tyler Myers is on your third pair. All of a sudden, Carson Soucy's on your third pair. One of those guys, right? Because the other one would presumably play in the top 4 still. That gives your team a different look. And I think that's the big reason that I look at it now and say, like, yeah, they're probably like 1, maybe 2. Like, maybe you'd like to add a bottom 6, or I should say third line center who you can trust to play if Miller or Pettersson goes down. Like a Yanni Gourde type, I look at, for example. He was such a buzzsaw for the Tampa Bay Lightning in their playoff run.
That would be a big pickup.
Exactly, right? And it theoretically shouldn't cost you very much, right? And I think that'd be a really nice addition for this team. Gives you the flexibility to move Pius Suter back to the wing. You've got another center in the stable. And I think that's the kind of move that I think the Canucks would like to make. I think the one they know they need to make is for a top 4 defenseman. I think that's ultimately going to be the big one that they do. And then I think you'll see something else as well for that third line center help.
Do you think they had their eyes on Fabro?
I don't know. I don't think they've been interested in the past. Like, I'd have to go back and look, but from everything we've ever had indicated to us, like, I don't think they were very high on Fabro. Hell, like, another name, like, I don't think they were very high on Erik Brandstrom, right? They had a chance to sign him in free agency. They didn't. They trade for him as part of the Tucker Poolman trade to make the money work, and then they send him down to the minors. Like, anybody could have picked him up off waivers. Like, truthfully, I don't think the Canucks were very high on Erik Brandstrom. I don't want to call him an afterthought in that trade, because I'm sure the Canucks had their choice of a few players and they chose Erik Brandstrom. But, like, I certainly know that the Canucks weren't looking at it and saying, yeah, Erik Brandstrom's going to come in. He's going to be a third pairing guy, and he's going to eventually bust into the top 4 the way he has now. Like, they didn't think that when they made that trade. We know that. So the fact you got him is already found money. Like he's found money in that trade. That's already a win for them to move Tucker Pullman out and get Brandstrom back. Anything after that is just gravy, right? So I wonder what the future holds for Brandstrom, but when it comes to that blue line, that's the way I look at it. That like, yeah, you go get a top 4 guy and all of a sudden Eric Brandstrom, rather than having to be a top 4 experiment, like he's making a really good third pairing with Myers or with Soucy or whoever's there.
No, Brandstrom's been great since he joined. I mean, hopefully he can just keep it up. Yeah. Well, thank you for coming, man. I'd love to have you on for a longer one in the future.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I'm so tied up. It's Canucks Convo and game day, so time's tight, but I will definitely be back, and we'll have you on Canucks Convo soon as well, I think.
That'd be great, and I appreciate you taking the time. I really do.
Hell yeah. Awesome. Sounds good, man. Appreciate it.
All right. See you, dude. Have a good show.
Thanks.